So I'm really thrilled today that I have Franzigera, who is here from Concordia University, which she says much more elegantly than I do, with all the right accents in all the right places. And France, I want to say welcome, bonjour, and merci beaucoup, because you've come on board as a willing, I keep saying victim, which sounds terrible, but as a willing participant in this conversation. So thank you to you. And I'm wondering if you would introduce yourself, talk about your role in your institution, and share anything that you would like to kick off our conversation today, please.
Thank you very much, Gayleen, and thank you for inviting me to this inspiring Women in Tech series. It's highly appreciated. So as Gayleen mentioned, I'm Franzigera, Associate Vice President and CIO at Concordia University since 2019. Concordia University is an English-speaking Quebec public university located in beautiful downtown Montreal. I'd like to mention that Concordia is recognized by its high diversity and inclusion, both among its 6,000 employees and the 55,000 students that it serves. So I'm responsible there for all aspects of our information technology, including cybersecurity, infrastructure, architecture, project management, and applications management. In terms of my background, I've been in IT since the time I graduated from the university at the age of 22. And I've had the chance to occupy several roles in IT. I would say mainly in large public organizations like the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the National Bank of Canada, and now Concordia. So I'm a person who really enjoy leading a diverse team of IT professionals. So I can say that this has been a key source of motivation for me. And on a personal note, I would like to share that I'm a mother of 2 children who are now adults. And I'm also the recent grandmother of 4 grandchildren under the age of 3, which I find absolutely wonderful. So that's basically
well, that's
my introduction, Gayleen.
You're just hitting the high points, but so much more in that. Thank you for that, and congratulations. What an exciting thing. First of all, holy cow, grandmother. So do you know, in our world, people use different nicknames or things for grandmothers. So are you grandmère? Like, how are your grandchildren being groomed to refer to you? Can I ask that?
It's very standard for me. In French, it's grand-maman.
Grandmama. Okay, very good. All right. Well, it's exciting for you, and to have 4 of them, it's like, it must be a lot of fun when you all get together. So thanks.
A lot of fun. Yeah, it's inspiring. They have a lot of energy, and yeah. That's cool.
Wonderful. It's wonderful. Well, thank you again, and thanks for the introduction. And I do think it's really interesting. If I can kick off with this, you've had a number of roles across public and large-scale organizations, and of course, we all love our CBC. And so you're part of now Canadian Higher Ed. So I'm wondering, and I've asked almost all of the panelists this as well, how did you decide, or what was the synopsis or the journey that took you out of those organizations and landed you at Concordia so that you can become a CIO in higher ed?
It's a good question, but actually, I guess working in higher education had to be part of my destiny, since I was actually approached by a recruiting firm, and the fit really, I found the fit was just excellent for me. The fit with the job and the fit with the domain. I find education, for me, it's the foundation of a happy society and a strong society. It gives confidence to people. It allows to evolve. It allows to solve complex problems. So this was really a fit, and this is why I decided to make the change and join higher education. And I really, I'm not disappointed. I really appreciate working in higher ed.
That's great. So it's been 3 years now, approximately, right?
Yeah.
And so what I will tell some of the folks on this who are attending this presentation is that you very quickly came on the scene and became very involved. I mean, you're an individual who clearly likes to be involved in activities and organizations and setting strategy and direction. You're on the board. Do you want to talk about some of those opportunities that came to you very quickly and why you stepped up so quickly to be part of that higher ed landscape? We often think about our roles as, and you know this, with the institution, but there's so much more than that for us here in Canadian higher ed IT. There's a lot of opportunity to participate across the country and provincially as well. So do you mind talking a little bit about that, Franz? Because I think you bring an interesting lens from that, having been newer into the environment.
Actually, I realized that as soon as I arrived that there is a wonderful network of colleagues across Canada called the CIO, as we know. So I said to myself, I need to be involved in participating in conversation and helping this network to evolve. And I offered to be part of the board of directors of CIO. And I'm involved in several committees as you know, as part of the CIO organization, which allows me to make connections with colleagues, with people who have the same jobs than what I do. So we can share our challenges, our fears, our successes. So I find it highly helpful. I also decided to be part of the board of director of the risk organization, the risk being an organization that provides a network for the overall Quebec province in higher education. So this is also something that I find very interesting and useful to my job. So these are two examples.
Yeah, they're really great examples. And, you know, I'm very fortunate I get to overlap with you on a number of committees and boards as well. And I'm always really intrigued because I find that you are a person who has such a great, you're able to very quickly absorb information and ask great questions and be able to bring really quick conclusions around discussions that we've been having. So I want to applaud you because you've been a great addition to Canadian higher ed and the university CIO environment for sure. And it does take it's extra work though. I mean, that's the other interesting thing around this is the, you know, kind of that balancing of our internal organizational demands and contributions, and then trying to also spread your time across these other interests, which are part of our roles for sure. And I think they help represent the institution, and there are some interests for your institution. I found that, but I do find it sometimes a bit of a balancing act. So how do you balance some of that? Where have you found some tricks of the trade around balancing your work between the internal and the external, or do you just find you're a person who likes to be super busy and it's all good, you can just absorb it all?
Well, I like to be super busy, but you know, it's a lot of work. But on the other hand, being involved with external networks and colleagues is helpful within our organizations because we arrive with knowledge of what the others do, what are the best practices. Especially, I was not necessarily an expert in higher education. I've been there only for 3 years, so I find it useful in my own organization. It empowers me and gives me some strengths that I don't necessarily have. So for me, it's an added value. And well, I'm a person who has a lot of energy, if I can say that. So I kind of find a way to balance the both involvements. Of course, the priorities in our internal organizations are always very, very important. It's always what I will prioritize, but I find time sometimes at the end of the day during lunch hours to be involved in those external events.
I mirror what you say. And I think it's great to remind people in our organizations about those opportunities as well and support them making those networking and connections across the country also, because it really is, you know, for me, and I think you're experiencing this also, having those peer relationships is really, really helpful. So you've talked a little bit about the value of the connections across the country and having that really strong collegial relationship. I'm curious if there's anything, maybe that is one of the things, but with higher ed IT, something that you love or you can compare that's different than the time you had at CBC or with National Bank. What, there's a cultural difference I think we have to acknowledge, but what in your mind is quite different about your leadership role in higher ed IT versus those two institutions?
I would say that in higher education, we really feel that we, as IT leaders, that we contribute concretely to enriching the lives of our students, of citizens, which are our students in this case. So we really feel, anyway, it's the case for me at Concordia, we really feel important players, important team players to ensure that we enrich the life of our students, which is the primary mission of universities, one of the primary missions. So this is really what I love. And I try to be aware of that on a daily basis, that yes, I work for a university and I can contribute to enriching the life of students, and I keep ensuring that IT can contribute to this.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And 55,000 students is a lot of students to be feeling
exactly.
That's a lot. Yeah. Did it surprise you a little bit, just how large that student body was when you first joined the organization? And I should point out too, in 2019, you transitioned very quickly from, the on-campus reality that we all knew to dealing with the whole COVID thing. That was probably quite a shift as well. Yeah.
Fortunately, I was there for 6 months before the pandemic, so I've had time, fortunately, to meet with people, to integrate myself, to have several meetings with my colleagues and stakeholders, my employees. So fortunately, but yes, of course, it's been a challenge because to understand the large university, it's a journey with faculty, how faculty works. There are many departments that we need to understand, many events that are happening at the same time. And so fortunately, we've had, I was well supported by my boss in this journey. And we've had the chance to use virtual tools like we do today so that I could continue to build my relationships with people. And
yeah. In some ways, you probably found that those really gelled quickly based on having to deal with all the challenges that we've had to deal with, which leads me really well into a conversation around compassion and empathy and how we bring that into our leadership roles. Especially over the last few years, I think a lot of us have leaned into those terms, being compassionate and empathetic and all of that. But I'm curious for you, why does that matter, and what does it mean for you, and how do we ensure that obviously there's always the job that has to get done, but how do we transition, or in your words, how have you been able to incorporate compassion and empathy into your leadership style while still ensuring that things get done and we're productive, and maybe there's some anecdotes that you've got, especially over the last number of years, but I'm really interested to hear from you how you're approaching that, Franz.
Yeah, first I should mention that I think that despite the technical aspects of our job, and as you mentioned, the increasing pressure to deliver, we have a lot of pressure to deliver as CIO and technology leaders. I've realized eventually that it's obvious what I will say, but we are first and foremost human beings. We need to be appreciated, understood, and respected. And really, Gayleen, at the beginning of my career, I was highly focused on results and tasks. Whatever it took to deliver. And I sometimes forgot that I work with human beings. So over the years, I've realized that I needed to improve my leadership skills as it relates to compassion and empathy, mainly to create stronger communications and connections with between people. And really, I can confirm that this naturally improves our productivity based on my own experiences. And it allows to deliver results even more quickly with much more fun, actually. So I read the recent article. I'll share it with you after the call, but the article mentions that empathy has a direct impact on innovation, on inclusion, and on the success of female and visible minorities in organizations. So that's quite interesting. So, and by the way, I'm still working on improving my compassion and empathy skills. For me, it's a day-to-day a job, if I can say that. And I do that by taking the time every day to listen, take the time to listen to concerns from my employees, and do my very best to help addressing these concerns with a positive attitude and calm. So I force myself to be aware that I need to be a compassionate and empathic leader. And well, it's been a very positive thing that I've done for me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I often think of that quote. It's, they won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
Right.
In a leadership role, one of the things that I've reflected on many times over the past number of years is just, you forget sometimes, we all have a role to play in an organization. I mean, you've got your jobs, responsibilities and activities, you're leading other people, they all have their level of responsibility and activity. And to your point, we're all human. And I do think that sometimes we get focused on the productivity aspect and what have you, but in a leadership role, the other component of this that I always reflect on and really think about is people watch and they're paying attention to you and have expectations that sometimes we don't even anticipate. And so that piece of, compassion and empathy and how you bring that into conversations is really important, but it is a challenge because you're right, results focused. And I thank you for being very vulnerable and talking about how that used to be way more an area of focus is the end result and at all costs, which I'm sure it never was, because that doesn't strike me as your approach to things, but to be more empathetic. And so when you think about that, does that I guess you're also leading leaders. So how are you helping your own leadership team to consider those considerations around compassion and empathy? What kind of conversations, or are there some cultural things that you're doing to help people collectively, because you're one leader and then you've got leaders following and there's a trickle-down effect?
Well, this is something we discuss regularly, listening, compassion, empathy. Since a year ago, we started having these discussions, because we wanted to find ways of motivating our employees. And this came up in our discussions. So we have HR touch points that we have implemented in my team, where we discuss those types of things and share experiences and issues with employees and how what we can do to help resolving those issues. So this is really true conversation, to answer your question. Yeah. And I'm trying, I hope it works. I'm trying to lead by example.
But we're still human. I mean, that's part of our reality as leaders, and you raised this earlier as well. So we come with our own, if I can call it baggage, our insecurities and trying to develop and continuously improve upon how we lean into our strengths. We have things that frustrate us as well. So, how vulnerable are you in the work environment? Because that's a whole other component of that, is being human and allowing people to see you as human. So do you have a sense that that has been easier for you as you've leaned into compassion and empathy to be more open about yourself and those human aspects? Or are you, I don't know. I mean, I think this is always a challenge for people newer into leadership, but also those who are in leadership to know where's the balance and how human do you get to be as a leader? So I don't know what your thoughts might be around that.
Yeah, compassion and empathy certainly has helped. One thing that comes to my mind when you refer to insecurities and so on is that I often feel alone in my CIO seat. So several things, as you know, the first must remain confidential and can be shared with others necessarily. Also, I'm not always 100% sure about some of my decisions or orientations. And this is not something we want to show necessarily to others as a leader. So I'm going somewhere else now, but I think for me, a professional coach or an internal mentor has always been very, very useful to me in terms of managing my insecurities or try to focus on my strengths and improve some of my skills like compassion and empathy, like we just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's huge. And it's a conversation that I've had with some of the other CIOs who participated in this series, is really around that mentorship and coaching and how important that is. And you're right, sometimes it is quite lonely because there are things that we know that we can't share with everybody, and we have our own strategies and everything. And yeah, I mean, do we need to really unload, if I can call it that, sometimes on the people around us? Maybe that's not what they need when you're trying to support them and all of the things that they're doing. I do want to point out, we had a question that's already come in, and it's really part of the vein of what we've just been discussing. So I want to share the question with you, Franz, and see if you'd mind taking a stab at it. The attendee who posed the question said, interested to know, do you believe that your male counterparts find that they need to shift their leadership skills to be more empathetic, or is that an expectation of women leaders to help shift stereotypes that strong, confident women can face?
It's a good question. I think it depends, because some of my male colleagues, if I can say that, or some of my directors who are men, will embrace compassion and empathy a lot, maybe to some extent more than me. And whereas others not necessarily. So it's a difficult question, because I'm not sure that I can see a definite pattern, women versus men. I think generally speaking, it's easier for women to share things, to acknowledge our weaknesses, or to share our weaknesses. This is true though. But as far as compassion and empathy, I don't see a definite pattern yet. Maybe I will pay attention to that. It's a good question.
It is a really good question. I think it's interesting that, I would say, and I'm sure we can talk about this for an hour on its own, just this question is, for women to show compassion and empathy, and also to be more vulnerable, I think that's very much personality driven and experience driven as well. However, I think I don't know that in my case, and maybe I can question you on this one, are we trying to shift a stereotype that we're strong and, because we're strong and competent, we're trying to soften that through the compassion and empathy? I don't think that's actually how I feel about it as I read the question. And, we would have to get into a conversation with the individual who had the question, but I don't feel like I'm altering my personality because I don't want people to think of me as a strong leader. I think it truly is, recognizing the value of humans and the human side of the work that we do. We all have a full, they like just in a coaching terminology, we're all creative, resourceful, and whole. And your home life, your work life, one of the things that's been helpful for me is not trying to pretend I'm one thing in one place or one in the other. This is me at all times. And so maybe, are you being more compassionate and empathetic in your own home life as well? So is this a well-rounded vulnerability journey that we're on? Maybe I can take the question and turn it a little bit in that direction for you, especially now that you're a grandmama.
Oui. But I think, I think compassion, and I'm not, I'm not doing that to demonstrate anything, first of all, on my side, like you. And I think it's helpful in our personal lives as well, of course. And for me, compassion and empathy, it's not about showing anything. It's about listening to people and try to put ourselves in their shoes. And from there, try to provide advice or just listen, just to have a conversation with this person to show that we understand the concerns and try to find solutions with this person. So for me, this is what it's all about. And it's certainly helpful and professional in our professional work, but absolutely in our personal lives with our partners, husbands and family and friends. This is something that it's funny that you're raising that. this is something that I have started paying attention to as well, especially with friends, trying to listen more and trying to put myself in their shoes. And I didn't do that earlier in my life. So yeah, that's interesting. But definitely, this is, I think, compassion and empathy are helpful in both area.
Yeah.
And are not at all to demonstrate anything, not for me in any cases.
I think that is such an interesting reflection too, because part of this is just maturity. I think we've learned that the world doesn't turn around us. We have to be part of the ebb and flow of the world around us. And so, I think a lot of us know people who've gone through an awful lot over the last couple of years, especially, and recognizing that everybody's carrying a load. It's very different than ours in some cases, but the importance of knowing that people have full lives. And for our staff, they're showing up at work every day with this other stuff going on. And I know in our panel, we had talked about that. Is it different for women than men? And I think that, the world is shifting, and you and I had some interesting conversations about this, because some of this is cultural based as well. Some of it may be whether you're in an urban environment versus a more rural environment. There's a lot of different things that factor in. But I think, obviously all genders are dealing with family and partners and balancing that with work and their own health and well-being as well. So it is just, it's much more complicated. I think we're more aware of the complexity of people's lives than maybe we used to be in the workplace, because we're in people's homes. I mean, I'm sitting here at home right now as we're having this conversation. So, there's a lot more vulnerability just in that alone. So yeah, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that comment, but I do think it's quite fascinating how we are really shifting away from thinking this is, people are playing particular gender roles.
Yeah, absolutely. Things are very different. And I can see that with my two sons who are adults as well. So as you mentioned, men and women are both involved now more and more in family life and responsibilities, and they care a lot about the work-life balance, a lot more than before. So again, I think compassion and empathy are important skills to handling these situations, because we have to manage or respect the needs of each of everybody based on this. So there's no more a definite pattern for men and a definite pattern for women. So this is really depends on the individual, on its context and its its needs and requirements. So
yeah. Have you always lived in Quebec? Have you lived out in another province at all?
no, I've always been in Quebec.
Yeah, so I've often wondered, and this is really anecdotal based on my interactions with peers who are in Quebec, and we have a number of wonderful colleagues who you interact with on a regular basis as well. Is there a cultural difference in terms of what the norms are around shared responsibility in Quebec from what you understand? I know it's difficult to answer that question from an external, where I sit might look very differently, but what do you think about that? Or is that even?
I don't know, but what I know is that our provincial governments are very sensitive about this. They provide self-care, children care services. It's a priority. So yeah, maybe it comes from our government and culture.
Yeah.
I cannot really compare. I would have to. It's a good question, and I take note of this. I would like to. I would have to have more conversations with my colleagues outside Quebec to see how it goes, how it is perceived, and how these.
I'll dig into you outside of this environment, maybe, and we can have that conversation, because anyway, that's a whole vein of conversation as well. See how we can go along a lot of threads here. We could talk for hours about a lot of these things, which is great. I'm wondering about for you, as we're talking about the gender change, and there's certainly been, I would say, in my own case within my institution, even in the 5 years, I've just hit the 5 years here at McMaster, a real shift in representation in various leadership positions. So there are now more women that I report to, 2 women. I used to report to 2 men. I have more women directors than I used to have. I'm seeing a bit of a representation shift. I don't know if that's the case where you are. I know you've only been at Concordia for 3 years, but within your leadership roles, if you've noticed that as well. And, that shift and that focus or change is happening in some areas. And you and I had talked a little bit about some of the areas that we're still struggling to see more female representation in. So, which would be infrastructure, perhaps, or cybersecurity. I'm wondering if on those 2 levels, are you seeing a shift in representation across your institution and your other organizations that you've participated in? And maybe it's not just gender, it's just generally diversity. And what is our challenge in the infrastructure cybersecurity side of that, if indeed that is something that you have also been reflecting on?
An excellent question, because I still see a lot of men in those jobs right now in my own team, but also elsewhere. Yeah, it's interesting question. But when I studied in IT at the university some years ago, infrastructure, I remember that infrastructure was clearly a men thing, almost a physical construction related type of topic. And I remember that women that were more interested in business analysis and software development, or were more encouraged to focus on this, probably due to, I think generally speaking, it's fair to say that women so far has been renowned to be more rigorous and to have a greater listening skills. Probably that's because of that, I don't know. But I'm thinking out loud with you, but I believe that this situation has remained to a certain extent. I think there's still some historical aspects of that. And however, I see potential changes in the near future, because, as you know, these 2 domains, infrastructure and cybersecurity, they are more and more composed of business solutions. They are more and more visible to the business, and they evolve towards cloud-based or software-based solutions. So I think we now have an opportunity to recruit more women in this area. And how to do this, I think one thing to do this is to change the focus and the employment mandate for these jobs, from pure technical skill requirements to a mixture of technical and business skill requirements. And this is something I'm in the process of doing at Concordia, since I have several openings right now in these two domains. So I decided in collaboration with HR and my senior management team to completely review the job descriptions in terms of the requirements and mandates. And I'm hoping to attract more women in these fields, because we need both women and men, I think, to gather the several perspectives to succeed. So, yeah.
Sorry, and I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I agree with you. But the other piece on that, France, that I think is quite interesting, you know, this is one of our realities when we're part of large organizations, is some of the ability to change the approach to, you know, there's a bit of a time investment that has to happen there. So changing job descriptions and changing the requirements in job descriptions, absolutely, I think can have a huge impact on how people see themselves potentially, or having the potential even to step into an opportunity that maybe they wouldn't, depending upon how it's presented. And I think that is a known opportunity for us as employers to think about differently how we present things. And to your point, the infrastructure and cybersecurity worlds are really shifting, and there's so much demand in both areas with that shift as well. Have you found it coming again from other organizations, although you've talked about them as public, do you feel that higher ed is a little slower to change around some of these? Or are you finding quite a lot of partnership with your peers in HR and others to try and make this happen quickly so that we can address our challenges around recruitment?
You know, I think at Concordia, at least, it's treated seriously. Even outside my department, there's more and more women in leadership roles at Concordia. The deans, the provost is a woman, the VP of research is a woman. So no, I think it's going quite well on that side. And from visible minorities perspective, as I mentioned earlier, it's the characteristic of Concordia to have several different visible minorities a part of its employees and students as well. So
yeah, well, and I think that's helpful. Again, understanding that the importance of having diversity within all of our areas is critical to our success and the way people approach things. And you have a number of higher ed institutions in Montreal as well. So you have a very competitive environment there. Has there been any opportunity with your peers at the other higher ed institutions, the other universities like McGill, our university in Montreal, to talk about a different approach to recruitment? Would you share staff, or do you have staff that you share at all in across the organizations?
I wouldn't say that we share staff yet, but
Steal
yes.
Staff? Are you stealing staff from each other, France?
That's better said. But actually, yes, we are a group of CIO from Quebec universities. It's a formal group, formal network. We meet every month, and recruitment is certainly part of important discussions that we have on a monthly basis. Not necessarily in the context of recruiting more women or men, but especially in the context of resource scarcity. What can we do to improve the situation? And yes, we started discussing how we could share resources, and maybe we can identify a common projects involving some of our resources instead of reinventing the wheel in each of our organizations, considering the lack of resources. Right. So yes, we are having a lot of creative discussions about that.
Yeah, and I have to think that salary comes into those conversations because each institution has its own approach to that also. Even in the institution, we know sometimes that there are disparities in the way salary is dispersed across IT areas as well. So yeah, anyway, I mean, it is a big challenge when you're in an urban environment, because the ability for people to move around is much I want to say easier, because I know in a big city it's still a lot of transportation challenge, but yeah, so I mean, is that something that you are thinking about from a hybrid work environment? Is there some competitive approaches to how people have identified their approach to the hybrid work environment across the institutions there?
If I plan to do what I plan to do to accommodate, well, there's me and my sector, and there's the university. I can start with the university. So this is very inspiring what's happening right now. We are reflecting the whole university on hybrid work, what it means for our university. Of course, it depends on the role of each individual, and we have undertaken several pilots. The team would be fully working from home. Another team is piloting to be fully on campus, based on specific requirements of this team, and other all kinds of other combinations of hybrid work models. So we are currently piloting this. I mean, I'm highly involved in all of this, and for now, in my own department, I have asked all people to be on campus for 2 days per week, maybe. And again, I'm reflecting out loud. I find it maybe a little bit limitative, because why 2 days? Why not 3? Yeah. So I'm reflecting on maybe having a more flexible working environment where people come to campus to have team meetings, team collaborative meetings. It can be a meeting from 9 to 11, and then they get back home to avoid traffic at the end of the day, these types of things. So I'm myself and my management team, we are reflecting on all those possibilities to remain competitive on the market and to attract talents and to retain the good resources that we have.
Yeah, it's really challenging, but I think it's also an opportunity for great thinking and continuous improvement, trying out things, seeing how they work. We've been talking about that as well. And I know, similar to yourself, across the campus, there's a good conversation, but within the McMaster IT community, there's lots of conversations about this as well. And I don't know that anyone has a perfect answer at this point. I just think that there's a lot of reflection, and let's see how this works, and let's try, then let's review and see how it goes. So across your sector in Quebec, is that a very similar approach that you're having those conversations with your peers, others?
Yeah, I would say so. There are universities who are more not modern, but who are bolder in terms of implementing new ways of working, because they have specific challenges, But yeah, generally speaking, it's about the same situation. We are, as you mentioned, we are all reflecting on what we should be implementing, especially in the specific context of IT, where resources are very scarce. So yes, it's a reflection that is ongoing, and I think as we progress, it will also depend on what the huge companies would be doing in the near future, like the Google, those guys.
I was going to ask you that. Are you seeing recruitment out of your higher ed environment too? Some of those larger, I know some of our colleagues on the West Coast are definitely experiencing that through the West Coast of the US. They're drawing people down. Are you finding that in Montreal as well? Is that a big area of concern for some of those bigger folks?
It happens, yes, it happens, certainly. Yeah. Bigger organizations. Ben, you mentioned it earlier, salary in universities, or probably in the public sector in general, can be a challenge to attract and retain talent. So this is one of the main issues as well.
Yeah, fascinating. We have another question, if I can share this with you, just to see. I think one of our participants is curious about creative ideas that you might have to amplify any minority voices. How can we help minority groups across our student, staff, faculty who may have different needs or limitations, particular generations of IT users, tech users who do not have access to the best of or newer devices, various different things that we know. And we certainly talked about as part of the pandemic response. How do we deal with people who don't have good internet access at home? How do we help people who don't have good video conferencing connections, who have maybe disability needs? Are you and your team thinking about that as well? Because it ties to how do we support people from an IT perspective, but also could we find different ways of recruiting or expanding our recruitment circle? If I can, sorry, Krista, I'm taking your question, I'm kind of altering it a bit, but also, if you think about it from a recruitment perspective, how do we help to address some of those limitations that might be keeping us from excellent prospects, if I can say it like that, from a hiring perspective as well? I don't know what your lens is in your environment, if you're having any conversations about that or thinking about those raising of minority voices and thinking about how do we help to be more inclusive across the work we do.
Well, for the minority voices, for me, it's all about open dialogue. I have conversations with the CIO events that I'm doing. Sometimes it's one-on-one, sometimes it's with a small group. So this is a good forum where these voices minorities can voice their concerns. We are implementing surveys with our employees. It's important, and I keep mentioning that, it's important that everybody in my team knows that they can reach out to me, they can reach out to their manager to discuss any related concern that they may have regarding the technology or to improve hybrid work or to improve the work of employees. We provide computers. We make sure that employees can have a computer at home. There's nothing much we can do about internet capacity at home for now. We've had so many discussions actually during the pandemic with internet providers, and this is another story. but we're trying to do our best to accommodate the needs for the employees who can work from home based on their job responsibilities. And this is certainly a priority for me, and we're having a lot of discussions about that on a daily basis. If I can say that, for me also meetings, I try to make sure that hybrid meetings are real hybrid meetings, because it's easy during a meeting where, for example, 5 people are on site on campus and 5 others are remote. It's easy for the people on campus to just talk between themselves and forget about the people who attend remotely. So logistically, it's a challenge. So we make sure that when we are aware, when we have hybrid meetings, that it's a hybrid meeting. So we have to recognize or remember that there are people at the end of that attend remotely, and make sure they can participate and they can voice their concerns and so on.
Yeah, and I think that is a real challenge because, well, first of all, there's the technology aspect of that. So needing to have the appropriate environment so that you can make it very interactive and capable. But you're right, it's a training, isn't it? It's a different approach to how we do things. So I think that's an interesting area that we're all somewhat nascent in, but I anticipate we will very quickly figure it out, because we are not going back to everybody being on campus all the time. I think that's just, that's my conclusion from everything. And I think you're probably feeling the same way. Yeah, so I know we've got some minutes left, and I want to flip a little bit away from some of although I'm always open to you bringing any more of your professional perspectives and thoughts as a woman in tech. I do want to provide an opportunity just for people to get to know you as an individual a little bit better as well. And I think you did a great job at the beginning of highlighting family, which is always really important. We are, again, very much about our full selves. You live in Montreal, and so I'm going to throw out things about Montreal that I think many people probably would share. There's a recognition that there's excellent food there, there's excellent music there as well. I know a lot of people used to talk about the comedy festival that was there. What is it about Montreal? You've lived there. I don't know if you've been just in Montreal your whole life, or what do you love about Montreal? As somebody who's a person who's really centered there, what would you, maybe you don't want to tell us all the good things about Montreal in case we all decide to move there, but share with us your Montreal perspective, because I think people are always fascinated about that city.
Montreal is definitely a city where life is good. Yes, I've lived close to Montreal for many years. So so as you mentioned, there are so many excellent restaurants from different cultures and countries. That's what is interesting in Montreal. You can be integrated to some other cultures through excellent restaurants. So this is very good. There's the jazz festival during the summer, the Juste pour rire, just for laugh festival. There's always something interesting, and there's a beautiful and large mountain also in Montreal. It's called the Mont Royal.
Yes.
Where it's so pleasant to walk there or run or have a chat with someone, a friend, or meditate. It's beautiful place to be. This is my coup de cœur, the Mont Royal, and I try to go there as often as I can. And I like to say as well that in Montreal, we are people with a Latin character. So people who like to laugh and celebrate. So for sure, this fall's Couture meeting in Montreal will be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think for us professionally, when we have the opportunity to go to Montreal, it's always a wonderful experience. And I've had many wonderful opportunities to be there. It's a great city. Do you, and because of the opportunities in the city, you probably do spend a fair bit of time there, but you also have a lot of interests. You told me that you're a big sports lover and also a sports doer, which is, not good English, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of those things that you do to get away from work. What do you do when you don't want to be near the workplace?
So the only thing that works for me is that to really unplug is to practice sports, ideally outdoors. So for me, first of all, I'm away from my computer and my mobile devices when I exercise, and secondly, it allows me to get rid of any work related tension, really.
Yeah.
So it works for me. So I like it to practice several sports, not just one. I practice skiing of all sorts, hiking, running, biking, and also sailing, because my husband and I have a sailing boat.
Yeah.
The United States. So now that the pandemic is over, we can go there every weekend and do some sailing. So it really allows me to unplug, forget about work, and take some distance so that I can take better decisions
being near water too is just a totally different way of freeing your brain. It's beautiful. So have you always sailed? I didn't know that you were a sailor. That's very cool.
But when I was younger, I was doing sailboarding. And then we transitioned to a more traditional sailboating.
Yeah, excellent. That's wonderful. Yeah. It must be fun. Have you taken the grandchildren on your boat yet?
Yes, one of the 3 years old. It was interesting and funny.
Good.
Moment.
Yeah. That's excellent. I think it's so important to have those interests outside of work. So good for you. And the one question I've been asking everybody too, France, before we wrap up, was reading. Everybody, I know it's always hard to balance all of the activity that you're doing, plus work, and then throwing reading in for good measure. But do you find time to read? And if you do, are there any particular books that you have found very helpful to you?
Yes, I find time to read, especially during the summer, during my summer vacation. Generally speaking, I like historical novels. And one book in particular that I would recommend is a book called, I don't know if you know about it, Fall of Giants from Ken Follett.
Yes, yes, yes.
So it's a book
That's
that
an
allows
investment. You really got to put time in.
no, it allows you to project yourself in the early 1900s, and it describes so well what happened during the First World War. All of this with an inspiring human stories and endearing characters. So this is a really good book in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely falls under the category of an epic novel, but a historic one as well. And he's done a great job researching that one. So if people haven't read it, first of all, you need time. But secondly, it is an excellent book. It's funny, that's a book that my mom often recommends to people. She just loved it for sure. So it's the kind of book when you lend it, you need to make sure you put your name on the inside thing so you get it back again. So I don't know if many of us have time to read those books twice, though. They're big books.
What?
Excellent. All right. Well, France, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Whenever I interact with you, you bring a real spark to a room or to a video session. I want to thank you so much for making time today. I know that you're extremely busy and it's summer. So when you're not working, again, you probably do want to be outside and undertaking some of the activities that you mentioned to us. I really appreciate your reflections on being a woman in tech, being a CIO in the Canadian higher ed IT environment, and also being very open and honest about some of the things that you're contemplating as part of your career and as part of your leadership journey. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much to you, Gayleen, for inviting me again. It was highly appreciated.
Well, always a joy for us.
And I wish all the women all the best and great success.
Exactly. Well, thank you again. Have a wonderful end of summer. Good luck with the start of the semester. And to everybody else, thank you for being here and making time for us today. We really appreciate you, and we're looking forward to more opportunities to bring some of our amazing leaders to you. Sherry Baraniak from the University of Saskatchewan is up next, and so we will look forward to sharing her with you as well. So thanks, everybody. Au revoir.
Thank you.